That's not desperation time by any means. The Brewers still 6 out in front of everybody else in the division, or the Pirates and Cardinals. But, man, the Brewers have had just 2 series wins since the 4th of July weekend. Man, they got to turn it around. They got to get back on this winning track. It starts with the Braves coming up on Tuesday night. We'll talk about that coming up next. And Jack Stern from Brewer Fanatic will also join us a little bit later on in the podcast on this episode of Locked On Brewers.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, Chuck Freeman, your host and Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. We're here daily talking Brewers baseball with you. Thank you, everybody, for making Locked On Brewers your first listen every day. The reason why you make us a first listen, because you are the great Brewer fans. We're the #1 Brewer podcast on the internet because of you guys out there downloading us on the various platforms, on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. You have come to us first for your Brewer information each and every morning. Get your day off to a great start. Longtime sportscaster Chuck Freeman here in the state of Wisconsin, proud host of Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. This show is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, FanDuel this summer heating up with all the baseball going on, the Olympics, and the NFL starting up soon. You got exhibition games going on as well. FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. Something for everyone, every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. All right. Brewers had the day off on Monday, and they get back into action with the Atlanta Braves. We just saw the Braves here last week, and the Brewers dropped 2 of 3 to these guys after winning the opener on Monday. Braves came back and won Tuesday and Wednesday, and the Braves started to heat up a little bit, although they were shut out on Sunday against the Marlins at home. First time the Braves were shut out at home since 2021. The Marlins shut them out. That just kind of proves everything we talk about with baseball, that anybody can beat anybody. And the Marlins went in there in Atlanta on Sunday and got the job done. So both teams had the day off on Monday, and we're going to see these guys for the second time in as many weeks. Now, the Brewers, 7-7 since the All-Star break. As I mentioned, they've dropped 6 of their last 8 series, and they've dropped 6 of their last 9 games total. Not desperation by any means. You know, the Cardinals lost on Monday, so the Brewers added an extra half a game on them. It's up to 6 games. Now, it doesn't feel like the Brewers are 13 games over the 500 mark, but they have been playing better baseball. We saw better baseball in April. We saw better baseball in May, certainly in June. But since the 4th of July, it's been a struggle with these guys. It's been a struggle. They've dropped a couple of series, home and away with Washington. You know, the Braves, as I mentioned, came in here. They've dropped 2 or 3 to the Pirates. It's not been fun. It's not fun. And I think, as I mentioned in yesterday's podcast, a large part is not having Christian Yelich in the middle of that order, in the middle of that lineup. But there's nothing they can do about it right now. They didn't make a trade for a big bat. The Brewers obviously thought, Matt Arnold's words were, yeah, we looked at the offense. We thought about doing something, but at the end of the day, we didn't. We liked what we had. Now, that probably is code word for, well, we couldn't make a deal. We try, and because you look at the lineup, you don't have Yelich in the lineup, and you don't think, and the Brewers, I think, kind of know that Yelich isn't coming back tomorrow. And if he does come, it's probably going to be back at the end of the season. Maybe they shut him down for the rest of the year if he doesn't bounce back from his rehab. They needed to go out and get themselves another bat. Yeah, they just, to compete with the Phillies, the Dodgers, if you have any hopes of catching those teams or even winning a wild card series if it gets to that point, the Braves are going to be a tough out. The Braves, I think, are a better team than the Brewers. Even the Brewers have a better record. Braves are 9 games over the 500 mark at 60-51. They're 6 games behind the Phillies. They're not catching the Phillies, but they're on a big, hotly contested wild card chase that thankfully the Brewers aren't involved in because they play in such a bad division. This division is going to be, there's only going to be one team from this division, I think, that's going to the postseason. That's going to be the first place team, the first place Milwaukee Brewers. Yeah, this series against the Braves that's coming up Tuesday night, it's not a must, but they gotta go in there and play well. You know, they've been kind of meandering around for the last 5 weeks. They look good in those. They won those 2 hotly contested games in Minnesota right after the All-Star break. Then they took 2 or 3 from the Cubs, and since then, you know, they went back right into that funk that they started before the All-Star break. And they had this team meeting on Friday in Washington. All right, they had a team meeting. Murphy got these guys together. All right. Now, these team meetings, I don't look at a big deal into them. It just so happened they won on Friday night. Okay, they scored 8 runs. They won 8-3 with Montes on the hill. I don't look to say, well, they had the team meeting there and a few things out. I never looked at. I've been a part of teams that, you know, team meetings, they don't really, and especially on a professional level. These guys are all professionals. They don't need no team meetings to turn their game around. And if it does, it's a coincidence. You know what happened? The team meeting last Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, they fell in the tank again and lost 2 games. But the Brewers have to turn this around with the Braves come to town, with the Brewers going to Atlanta. The Braves are just here. We'll talk more about that and the pitching matchups with the Atlanta Braves. It's going to be a tough series for the Brewers, as it was last week against these guys. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team every day. FanDuel is the number one place to go on the internet to start making the most of your summer. The official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball, long been so reputable. This summer, looking to hook up all customers, not just new customers, all customers, with a boost or a bonus daily. Something for everyone, all day, every day, all summer long. You need to go to FanDuel.com and check it out. There's baseball going on in the afternoon. It's going on at night. It's going on late night. You want to get on the action, maybe the Olympics, you want to get on that. FanDuel, they're the official sports betting partner. And you need to look in, check out all the odds. They're great odds as well. You know, they're not hiking up the odds in anybody. Great set of odds. Stick with them. FanDuel.com. Make the most of your summer and take advantage of any booster bonus that they give you at FanDuel.com. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get us on Google, Spotify, Apple, wherever you download your podcast. We are there. And, of course, please, our growing YouTube page, search Locked On Brewers, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. That'll alert you every time we drop an episode here on Locked On Brewers. Please follow me on Twitter as well, Chuck Freeman, Freimund. Jack Stern from BrewerFanatic.com is going to be joining me here in a couple of minutes, and we'll talk and get his viewpoints on a few things on what's going on with the Brewers. That 3-hole that we were talking about in the lineup yesterday, we'll talk to him about that, what he thinks about the bullpen, and so on. All right, the Braves right now, as I mentioned, 9 games over the 500 mark. The pitching matchup for Tuesday night, Colin Ray on the hill. He's got the only win against the Braves this year. Pitched into the 6th inning last Monday night, got the win against Atlanta, gave him a couple of home runs, solo home runs, but the Brewer offense bailed him out, and they got to the Braves pitching staff on that night, and they coasted away the easy 8-2 victory, I think it was. It might have been 8-3. Anyway, went 5 1/3 innings, gave up 2 runs. Bryce Elder is going to be on the hill for the Braves. Now, he came back last Tuesday and got the win against the Brewers. He looked really good. His numbers hadn't been great. Bryce Elder had not been pitching all that well, but magically he came against the Brewers last Tuesday and pitched into the 7th inning, allowed just 1 run. They sent him back down to the minors. He's been back and forth from AAA to the parent club a lot of times so far this year. We were talking to him in the locker room after the game last Tuesday, and he said, yeah, it is what it is, but he's just trying to find his spot in that rotation and earn his way. Because of an injury, he got called up again, and he'll make the start Tuesday for the Braves. Wednesday, a rematch of a matchup we saw last week at AmFam Field, Freddie Peralta against Chris Sale. Sale struggled through the first 3 batters. He gave 3 singles against the Brewers last Wednesday and then settled down and pitched great. He gave 2 first-inning runs and was great rest of the game, and the Braves offense woke up, hit a couple of solo home runs off Peralta, and the Braves were able to take the rubber game of that series. So it's Peralta against Sale tomorrow night, Wednesday night, and then Thursday afternoon in the getaway game, Schwellenbach makes a start for the Braves, and right now it's Montas. Saw where there are some sites that say Morton was the starting pitcher, and I looked on the Braves site, it said Schwallenbach, so we're going to go with that against Montes, who will make his second Brewer start coming up on Thursday for Milwaukee. So, got 2 night games against the Braves, 6:20 Tuesday and Wednesday, 6:20 Central Time. You get it on Sirius XM, the SXM app, search Brewers. You get all 162 of the Brewers games right there, the home team call on Sirius XM. And Thursday will be an afternoon game. We'll talk more about that as we get closer to that. So that's the pitching matchups. Matt Olson's just been on a tear for the Braves. We saw him heat up against the Brewers a little bit. He's got 5 home runs in his last 9 games. And the guy you always got to worry about in the heart of that lineup is Ozuna, second in the National League right now with 32 home runs. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers, part of Locked On Podcast Network. We're going to talk to Jack Stern coming up here from Brewer Fanatic in just a second. I want to tell you about SupplyHouse.com. SupplyHouse.com, the reliable way to order plumbing, HVAC, electrical products online. Easy-to-use website packed with helpful resources. The latest product information helps you get the job done right every time. Shop a complete inventory, over 200,000 parts, over 400 top brands. Get your order delivered right to your door. Fast shipping, coast to coast. You need help with an order, get expert help every time. You're going to talk to a real person. Hey, check out their free Trade Master program. Many of the skilled tradesmen out there are enjoying this program. Dedicated phone line, free shipping, discounts at every order. Join the thousands of trade pros already benefiting from the free membership. SupplyHouse.com/T-M. Order plumbing, HVAC, electrical supplies from anywhere. Just a few clicks. SupplyHouse.com. Good to have you along. Chuck Freeman here on Locked On Brewers. Haven't had too many guests, if any, during the regular season. Haven't had time. We've just been cruising through, with our analysis of the game. But if we're going to go to a guest or two, Jack Stern is going to be my guy. BrewerFanatic.com. By Jack Stern. You get him on Twitter. And Jack has been covering every home game this year, except when he graduated. That was like the only time he missed. But Jack, first of all, congratulations, and appreciate you coming on the broadcast tonight.
Yeah, as always, thank you for having me.
Well, this season, man, so far, I talked to you a couple times during the offseason. We didn't really kind of know what to expect with these guys, but here they are, 13 games over the 500 mark. There's been some good, there's some bad, there's some ugly in this season, but the bottom line, here they are. Going into Monday, they were 5.5 games up in the division. What do you think so far?
I think they've definitely exceeded expectations that a lot of people had for them. I feel like even I was on a little bit more of the optimistic side, and I was projecting this team for somewhere in that 86 to 88 win range. For much of the year, they've outplayed that. So I think that you certainly can't complain about what they've done so far with the group that they've had. They've been a lot more successful, I think, than not only people nationally were projecting, but even some people locally like myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think anybody had these guys winning the division title, certainly in this division, and they still have to close this thing out. But here we are, early part of August. And when you look at this team and you see all the injuries and you see the number of guys that have started so far, 17 different guys, what do you think has been the number one reason why, or one or two reasons why you think this team is where it is, how we got to this point?
I think that you can point to Pat Murphy's leadership of this group. I think that's a big part of it. I think he does a good job just cultivating a culture that allows these guys to persist in spite of the adversity that they've faced. But I'm also going to point to just their defense. You talk about all of the injuries that this team has had on the pitching front. The fact that they play such good defense makes it a lot easier to run out that many pitchers and to still find a way to get the job done. When you have a group that's going to make so many plays behind you, even if you're kind of cycling through a bunch of pitchers who maybe some people would say don't profile as guys who should be starting big league games, when you have the ability to run those guys out there, and if they throw strikes and just pitch competitively and let guys put the ball in play and they avoid free passes or just free base runners, we've seen that defense help a lot of those pitchers play up beyond some of the results that you would expect to see them have. I think Colin Ray's a good example. Tobias Myers is another example. Even Bryce Wilson during that run that he was in the starting rotation. So I think it's a combination of the leadership that they have with this year's team, but also just the way that this group is structured. It has kind of allowed them to use a little bit of a plug and play approach with their pitching staff. I think if you asked anyone with the Brewers, they wouldn't have said that it was going to be this extreme. But I do think the way that they constructed this roster has helped them weather the storm a little bit with some of the injuries that they've faced.
Now, as of like the overall pitcher on this team so far, as I mentioned, 13 above the 500 mark, great. But you look at, they've lost 6 of their last 8 series, 6 of 9 games overall. What are you seeing there with the slippage as of late with these guys?
I think it's kind of just something that was going to happen at some point. I do think they were overperforming a lot of, not only I kind of talked about like what the expectation was going into the year for me and maybe for some other people. I think we're seeing them come back down to that level a little bit. Like if I had to guess, I would probably think that they're going to play about 500 baseball the rest of the way. When I look at this team, it's a team that in my mind was always solid and probably a lot better than some national pundits would give them credit for, but it's also not a team that looks like one of the top tier teams in baseball. They're still there record wise, just because of how hot of the start they had, and because there have been a lot of other teams across baseball that have underperformed this year. But I do think it's a little bit of that. I think you're seeing some of these guys who don't have as much experience kind of going through their first stretch of just not playing winning baseball, and some things aren't going their way lately, so they've had to fight that as well a little bit. I think it's just been a combination of that. There's been some guys who were really carrying the offense early on who have struggled lately. I do think kind of what we've seen over this last month, this month of July, especially their first losing month of the year, that was kind of what happens when a lot of things go wrong, especially in terms of guys who you would hope to have contribute. Christian Yelich going down with another bout with the back injury obviously doesn't help him in that regard either. But I think it's been a combination of some guys have regressed a little bit to what you might normally expect. I think that it has been a grind a little bit lately for some of these guys who don't have the experience. Just all these different things kind of going on that contributed to a month that wasn't so great for the Brewers on the field.
Ortiz is one of those guys who's had some game slippage as of late. He's in a little bit of a hole at the plate. What do you see there?
I think, again, it's a guy who obviously hasn't seen this much big league pitching in his career, so I think you have seen guys make a little bit of an adjustment. It really does seem, too, like the neck injury kind of threw him off of his rhythm a little bit. He was going really well until that cropped up. He tried to play through it for a little bit, tried changing his batting stance as he was trying to play through it. Just not a great development there if you're trying to put up a productive season to kind of have that get in your way. Seems like he's healthy now, but he hasn't quite been able to get back to where he was before. I think we've seen him chase a few more pitches out of the zone since he's come back from that as well, not putting himself in as many favorable counts. So I think that when you have a guy who's struggling like that, sometimes you just need to stop, take a deep breath, take a step back, and just try to get back to what made you successful early on, because I do think there is still a productive hitter in there in Joey Ortiz. The season numbers still look really solid for him. I wouldn't be surprised if he does start to get it going a little bit the rest of the way here, but you are seeing a guy who looks like he is pressing a little bit, and the injury kind of cropping up in the middle of that obviously doesn't help.
You know, Jack, I did a show yesterday about how much they miss Christian Yelich. They just missed that stick in the middle of this lineup. I see the lineup on Sunday, Gary Sanchez. We love our Gary Sanchez, but, he's not the number 3 hitter on a contending team. Where do you see, what can they do in that 3-hole right now? I wish they would have got themselves a bat, but they're going to be juggling guys until, if or when Yelich comes back.
Yeah, I really would have liked to see them get a bat to plug into that spot. I do think that was a need for them at the trade deadline. Fortunately, you really didn't see that kind of left-handed impact bat moving on the market this year. It was a seller-friendly market, and when you look at a lot of the hitters who moved, they were guys who really wouldn't have filled that need for the Brewers anyway. There were a couple of bigger names who moved, but then you're talking about potentially getting into a bidding war, which is not something that the Brewers have liked to do in recent years. But obviously now they're going to have to try to fill that internally, kind of like you touched on. It's going to be a couple different guys who they need to step up in that spot. But I think Jake Bauers is a guy who they're probably going to look at quite a bit in the middle of the order, maybe not always in the 3-hole, but in the middle of the order as a left-handed bat. He's been getting on base a lot since he switched from his leg kick to a toe tap in early May. He's got an on-base percentage in that 340 range since he did that. He's shown a little bit of power at times. He hits the ball pretty hard. strikes out a lot too, but he's kind of settled in as a 3 true outcomes type guy where it's either going to be extra bases, a walk, or a strikeout. And if he can harness that a little better with more playing time and kind of do what he's capable of, I think he's a guy that the Brewers could look to in that spot just to hopefully give them a little bit of thump in the middle of the order as a left-handed bat. He's obviously not Christian Yelich. There's no one who you can ask to be what Christian Yelich was for most of the season before that back injury cropped up again. But I do think Bauers is kind of one of those guys who you point to and say, we think that there's a solid left-handed bat in there, and now here's your opportunity to prove it.
Over at first base, Hoskins, he's got a lot of home runs. He's gone through some injury. I mentioned this on a radio show. It was on Monday. I said, I think he was just on his way before he got that injury earlier this year. I thought Hoskins, when he had his 9th home run, then I think he got hurt the next day. I think Rhys was on his way to having a year, and then he got a little setback. And I think that's a guy too that just never has really got on track this year.
Yeah, it seems like he's getting a lot closer now with the home run binge that he's been on lately, but it is tough sometimes, especially when you look at a guy like Hoskins. He's coming off a major lower body injury. He had the ACL injury that required surgery last year, missed the entirety of that year. And then when it seemed like he was starting to get it going a little bit, he deals with the hamstring injury now. So if you're a hitter and you're dealing with a lower body injury, that can obviously have some ripple effects just on your swing and on your athleticism as a player. So it seems like he's kind of starting to put that behind him. And when you talk about power guys too, some of these guys are going to be a little bit streaky, and I don't think he's an exception to that. So he definitely went through a rough patch coming off the injured list, but it's been nice to see him find that power a little bit more. The fact that we're seeing that from him right now is, I think, what's really encouraging, because that was always what the Brewers paid him to be, a guy who's driving the ball, not necessarily a high average guy or a high on base guy or a guy who's providing value defensively. They brought him in to provide some power, specifically home run power. And if he's doing that again now, I think if you're the Brewers, you can kind of rest easy a little bit and be a lot happier with what you've gotten from him lately. We know that the power stroke is still there. So just the reassurance that that's still there for him, that's a pretty big sign for the rest of the year.
I think so much in this past summer, people talked about, well, the pitching. To me, I think the pitching is maybe overachieved. Pitching has been fine in my book. A lot of times this summer, the Brewers are sitting here in a 1-0 game in the 7th inning. It's like, are they going to score? Like last Monday, it looked like they were going to go down one of those roads, and they explode for 8 runs late in the game, middle part to the late in the game. Do you see this offense? Is this something that they're just going to have to live with? Because I feel like this has been a chronic thing the last several years where, man, they sometimes just can't get out of their own way offensively. They get into these ruts.
I do think that this group they have offensively is better this year than the ones they've had in years past. I don't think it's really comparable all that much to the one they had last year. Last year's group was, let's not sugarcoat it, that was a terrible lineup, especially leading into the trade deadline before they acquired Mark Canha and Carlos Santana. At that point, you were just looking for competency in that lineup, not even good hitters, just competent hitters.
To watch sometimes, Jeff.
Right, exactly. They're a lot better this year. I don't think they're a great lineup, but I think that when you look at, first of all, just what they've done on the season, they do grade out still as a slightly above average lineup on the whole. And then I think when you look at the individual pieces in this group, it's a lot better as well, because you do have a mix of some on-base guys, some speed guys, but then also some power guys like Rhys Hoskins or William Contreras at times, or Jake Bauers at times, or Gary Sanchez at times. And then you pair those with the Bryce Terangs, the Sal Freliks, the guys who are going to be on base a little bit more, especially when they're going well and kind of wrecking havoc on the base paths with their speed. And we've seen this throughout the year too, where they have gone through some colder stretches, but it hasn't been anything like some of the extremes we've seen in the past. They've been able to bounce back from those stretches a little bit more frequently, or they've had some spurts within these stretches where they are putting up some more runs than they have in the past. They haven't lost larger stretches of games like they have in years past, and I think that's all part of it. Just the ability to some nights get the big hit for extra bases, and that's how you beat teams. Other nights, if the extra base hit isn't there, then you got other ways to beat guys by getting on base, playing a little bit more small ball, using the speed to try to make things happen. And I think that the Brewers are at their best when they have both of those going at the same time. It definitely hasn't been quite as cohesive as it was early in the year, but I do still think it's still that same mix. And I think that that's going to help them put up just enough runs the rest of the way. And I'm not especially alarmed by it. I think that some of the guys who have cooled off lately are also due to kind of take steps forward again and kind of see things even out a little bit. So they're definitely going through it right now more than early in the year, but it's still the same recipe to me. It's still the same group we've seen earlier in the year, what they can do and how they can be more dynamic. So I think we're going to see that start to happen again as we keep moving forward here.
Jack, before I let you go, what's your thoughts of the bullpen? I know we got some guys out there injured. Tell me what you think about once we get everybody back, what you think of this bullpen going forward.
I think once you get everybody back, it's still a pretty good looking group. You get Brian Hudson back into that mix. You get Trevor McGill back into that mix. Put those two guys behind Devin Williams. Those are two legitimate high leverage relievers. I like the Nick Mears acquisition. I know that he hasn't gotten off to the hottest start as a Brewer. He's only pitched a couple times, but I do like the stuff a lot there. I think he's going to be an impact arm for them down the stretch this year and long term. Even guys like Hobie Milner and Yoel Payamps who have underperformed this year. I think that Milner's been quite a bit unlucky this year. He's been a lot closer to the guy that he's always been the last few years than people might realize, just in terms of the strikeouts, the walks, the kind of contact he's getting. It's all very, very close to what he's usually done. Payamps has looked a lot better over the last few weeks after a slow start and a rough month of June and early July. He started to dial it in a little bit more. So you get that guy in there as well. I think even if you can move like a Joe Ross to the bullpen now that you've added to the rotation a little bit, I think he could be an impact factor there as well. So I'm not especially concerned about it. These next few days might still be tricky as they're trying to navigate these injuries. But if you start to get some guys back, I think you're still going to see that be one of the very clear strengths of this roster moving forward.
All right, Jack, thanks for taking some time out here on a Monday night, early Tuesday morning. We'll talk to you. We'll see you at the ballpark later on this weekend.
Thanks, Chuck.